Hey, y'all. Have you ever been in a position where you are the one who had to tell somebody the final truth, that this is how it is? They've been told this and that and that and the other, and now it's you. Everybody has told them what you are going to do for them, and you've had to relate the reality of the situation to someone. I work at a theme park, and it's funny. Almost every shift I have, someone will come to my register and they'll say, well, they told me I needed to come to you to do this or that. And I'm half the time I'm like, yeah, we don't do that. We've never done that. And I can't do that. It's not even possible. I don't have the mechanism by which to do that. And then the person will say invariably, well, they told me up there. Well, I'm kind of a jerk. I always ask, well, who told you up there? Or who told you over there? And they'll say, I don't know, just the person, people up there. Hmm. Well, I've come to a point now where I say, well, they don't work here where I am. They don't work here. So they probably know very little, if anything, about what's possible here. And the guest never likes it. I personally don't like being told one thing by one person and then getting and finding out that that's not the real deal. I hate that too. I would rather someone say, I don't know, go ask them. I don't know if they can do it or not. I'd rather that. And this is where Trump is right now. Trump is in a position that what he has to say to people is this, what you're doing, you can't keep doing it. This is USAID, what you're doing, you can't keep doing it. Today, he had to tell Zelensky from Ukraine, yeah, I know what the last guy did, but we can't do that anymore. We can't do that anymore. Here's what we're going to do moving forward. And Zelensky basically threw a temper tantrum in the Oval Office after not even really being invited. Just sort of showed up. The president said, "Oh, Zelensky's here. Okay, we'll fix a little lunch. We'll have a little meeting, a little press conference." And then basically Zelensky showed his ass. Not a good look for him. Not a good look. And it's funny when you look back at the history of this. Mainstream media doesn't want you to do this. This is why you're here. Mainstream media doesn't want you to look back at the history of this whole Ukrainian thing. Ukrainian, NATO, Russia. It's all a thing that's been happening since 2002. This is not new. If you noticed, Russia didn't invade Ukraine during the first Trump administration. Russia took Crimea during the Obama administration, and Obama did nothing. He could have, didn't do anything. I'm going to play some of a talk from Jeff Sachs explaining some of the history of this conflict. I hope that you get a lot out of it. I'm not going to play all of it. It's like 5 minutes long. I'm not going to play all of it. I'm going to play enough of it so you get a sense that this right now, what you're seeing, it's not a Trump thing. It's a perfect example of something getting kicked down, a can that kept getting kicked down the street, and no one's really paying attention to it. It's a perfect example of U.S. the United States, especially the intelligence community, continuing to infiltrate and be a part of other governments' elections and the like. The CIA in particular, and ineffective, damaging state departments during this time. That's what's gotten us here. And now Trump and JD Vance basically spank Zelensky, and they're in the mainstream media now going to be the bad guys because they weren't nice to him. He wasn't nice, and they weren't nice back. Two Republican representatives are like, "Oh, this is bad for our foreign policy going forward." No, it's good because people then know, other countries now know, hey, don't go there talking crap. Yeah, you're a grown man, wear a suit. You're a grown ass man, wear a suit, because that's the uniform of diplomacy. That's the uniform of people who are in charge of countries. Yeah, and try not to do Vogue. Take pictures for Vogue and do Vogue photo layouts in the midst of what you say is a war, the fight for your country. I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and play some of this. We're back in a minute.
So let me just explain in 2 minutes the Ukraine war. This is not an attack by Putin on Ukraine in the way that we are told every day. This started in 1990, February 9th, 1990. James Baker III, our Secretary of State, said to Mikhail Gorbachev, NATO will not move 1 inch eastward if you agree to German unification, basically ending World War II. And Gorbachev said, that's very important. Yes, NATO doesn't move, and we agreed to German unification. The U.S. then cheated on this, already starting in 1994, when Clinton signed off on basically a plan to expand NATO all the way to Ukraine.
So in 1990, James Baker, I believe that was the first Bush administration, said, listen, hey, Reagan, if you agree to the unification of Germany. Now, a lot of people who are out there in the street don't remember when there was East Germany and West Germany. So this which is was a remnant of World War II. If you agree to this unification, we will promise you that NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, will not move 1 inch closer to your border. Gorbachev said, okay. Right? That's when Reagan's like, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. You remember, you're old enough to remember that, right? So the wall gets torn down, Germany gets unified, and then it is a minute later, United States, under the direction of Bill Clinton, says, screw all that. And eastward NATO comes. Just eastward it goes. We just that treaty, the US goes, yes, screw that. We're not doing that. Yeah. Keep watching.
This is when the so-called neocons took power. And Clinton was the first agent of this. And the expansion of NATO started in 1999 with Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic. At that point, Russia didn't much care. There was no border other than with the Königsberg, but other than that, there was no direct threat. Then the U.S. led the bombing of Serbia in 1999. That was bad, by the way, because that was a use of NATO to bomb a European capital, Belgrade, 78 straight days to break the country apart. The Russians didn't like that very much. But Putin became president, they swallowed it, they complained, but Even Putin started out pro-European, pro-American, actually asked maybe we should join NATO when there was still the idea of some kind of mutually respectful relationship. Then 9/11 came, then came Afghanistan, and the Russians said, yeah, we'll support you, we understand, to root out terror. But then came two other decisive actions. In 2002, the United States unilaterally walked out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty. This was probably the most decisive event, never discussed in this context. But what it did was trigger the US putting in missile systems in Eastern Europe that Russia views as a dire, direct threat to national security by making possible a decapitation strike of missiles that are a few minutes away from Moscow. And we put in two Aegis missile systems. We say it's defense. Russia says, how do we know it's not Tomahawk nuclear-tipped missiles in your silos? You've told us we have nothing to do with this.
So we can see, as this timeline moves forward, how it is the acts of the US State Department and the like that have sort of caused this whole thing from the very beginning. I mean, we're talking about this whole thing started back in 1990, which is how many years ago? Exactly 90, 2000, 30 years, almost 30 years ago, right? So this is not a Trump thing. Trump is at the end of this, hopefully at the end of this process. Let's go ahead and hear some more.
And so we walked out of the ABM treaty unilaterally in 2002, and then in 2003 we invaded Iraq on completely phony pretenses, as I've explained. In 2004-05, we engaged in a soft regime change operation in Ukraine, the so-called First Color Revolution. It put in office somebody that I knew and I was friends with, and am kind of distantly friends with President Yushchenko, because I was an advisor to the Ukrainian government in 1993, 94, 95. And then the U.S. had its dirty hands in this. It should not meddle in other countries' elections. But in 2009, Yanukovych won the election, and he became president, and in 2010 on the basis of neutrality for Ukraine. That calmed things down because the U.S. was pushing NATO, but the people of Ukraine on the opinion polls didn't even want to be in NATO. They knew that the country is divided between ethnic Ukrainian, ethnic Russian. What do we want with this? We want to stay away from your problems. So in February 22nd, 2014, the United States participated actively in the overthrow of Yanukovych. A typical U.S. regime change operation, have no doubt about it.
It just keeps getting worse for us, doesn't it? It just keeps getting worse for us. The more that we're interfering, it just keeps getting worse. Walking out of the ABM treaty meetings, and then the invasion of Iraq that was the first Gulf War. And then putting missiles, Aegis systems missiles, that close to the border, that could reach, at the time, that could reach Moscow. That, again, all these things are happening. Frankly, a lot of us are cheering them on because we are continually told that Russia is our mortal enemy, and they may be. But in order to really understand the history of this, we have to go, well, it's not all them. Yeah, well, burn part there. It's not all them. What was our part in this? How did we exacerbate some of these problems now that, frankly, that the citizens of Ukraine are suffering from? And we're going to watch a little more, and so we can get to the end of this. So now we're at Trump at the end of it. Somebody's got to stop it. Somebody has got to stop it, right? We'll watch a little more.
And the Russians did us a favor. They intercepted a really ugly call between Victoria Nuland, my colleague at Columbia University now, and if you know her name and what she's done, have sympathy for me. Really. Between her and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Sachs, who's a senior State Department official till today, and they talked about regime change. They said, who's going to be the next government? Why don't we pick this one? No, Klitschko shouldn't go in. It should be Yatsenyuk. Yes, it was Yatsenyuk, and we'll get the big guy, Biden, to come in and do an attaboy, they say, you know, pat him on the back. It's great. So they made the new government. And I happened to be invited to go there soon after that, not knowing any of the background. And then some of it was, in a very ugly way, explained to me after I arrived, how the U.S. had participated in this. All of this is to say, the U.S. then said, okay, now NATO's really going to enlarge. And Putin kept saying, stop. You promised no NATO enlargement. It's been, by the way, I forgot to mention, in 2004, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, 7 more countries in the not 1 inch eastward. And then, okay, it's a long story, but the U.S. kept rejecting the basic idea, don't expand NATO to Russia's border in a context where we're putting in goddamn missile systems after breaking a treaty. 2019, we walked out of the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty. In 2017, we walked out of the JCPOA, the treaty with Iran. This is the partner. This is the trust building. In other words, it's completely reckless U.S. foreign policy. On December 15, 2021, Putin put on the table a draft Russia-U.S. security agreement. You can find it online. The basis of it is no NATO enlargement.
The U.S. kept rejecting the basic idea of do not expand NATO. Jeff's very smart, but he can't count. That was actually 8 countries. 8 countries getting closer and closer and closer to the Russian border. Again, I'm no apologist for the Soviet Union because, and I understand that Putin is KGB. Putin's old school KGB. He's not anything different than what they had. He misses. We have to be honest with this. I think Putin misses the Soviet Union. He does. He's not the least bit interested about becoming a large democracy or republic. He's not interested in that at all. He's about the spreading of communism wherever he can. But he understands that he needs to be able to make money to keep this communist thing going. And in order to keep his people together, to take their mind off their suffering, they too need an enemy. And the United States has provided that enemy. Continue to listen.
I called the White House that next week after that, begging them, take the negotiations. Putin's offered something, avoid this war. Oh, Jeff, there's not going to be a war. Announce that NATO's not going to enlarge. Oh, don't worry, NATO's not going to enlarge. I said, oh, you're going to have a war over something that's not going to happen? Why don't you announce them? And he said, no, our policy is an open door. This is Jake Sullivan. Our policy is an open door policy. Open door for NATO enlargement. That is under the category of bullshit, by the way.
So now we're here. Now we are here. In 2021, under the Biden administration, they had a chance. They had a chance to stop all this. So when Trump says, if I'd been president, this would have never happened, that becomes a lot more feasible in your brain because this this treaty, this agreement, this draft agreement that got put out by the Soviet Union, maybe Trump takes that negotiation and we have that discussion that would have prevented what we're having now, what they're having now. But that didn't happen. And it didn't happen because the big guy, Burisma, Hunter Biden, go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. They impeached Donald Trump because he made a phone call to Zelensky before to ask about all of that Hunter Biden, Burisma, big guy stuff. Forget that Victoria Nuland got this phone call intercepted to her and the ambassador to Ukraine, openly discussing regime change, which means they openly discuss interfering with the election of a foreign country. Does that sound familiar? It sounds familiar. And now at the end of this process, we have our president basically telling Zelensky, who's obviously not a serious individual, that unless they sign this mineral agreement, this rare mineral agreement, we're gonna have to stop sending you stuff. We have to stop, going into the taxpayers' pockets and sending you stuff, because it's obvious that Zelensky just wants this to go on. Just wants this to go on. It's obvious that the industrial military complex here in this country just wants this to go on. And let's be honest, as much as we're for the underdog and all that stuff, there's absolutely no way at all that Ukraine stops Russia. And I know people are saying and have said, "Oh, Trump's just a Russian asset." Well, if he was a Russian asset, why, in the 4 years he was president, didn't Russia just swallow Ukraine and be done with it? Why didn't they do it then? Just swallow it and be done with it. They could have. And the thing is, Putin doesn't care about his own people dying. He couldn't care less. He is completely agenda driven. He doesn't care that his soldiers don't have food or clothing. He doesn't care that his people are starving, in the rural parts of his nation. He doesn't care. See, a lot of us think that, have this Western mentality. He doesn't care. Putin has almost this Eastern mentality, sort of the same mentality as the Taliban or Hamas. Forward at all cost. Only a few people, and you have to be incredibly strong to actually stop him. He's not going to just stop. He has to be made to stop. This deal would have given Zelensky the backing of the United States, because when the United States goes into negotiations with Putin, which it's obvious because Zelensky says so, he doesn't really have the backing that he can negotiate with Vladimir Putin. He can't. He doesn't have the cards. And the only people who have the cards and could speak on his behalf is Donald Trump. The only person who could speak on his behalf is Donald Trump. That's it. And so he comes to the White House today. Oh, by the way, yeah, go somewhere and buy a suit. Can you do that? Can you dress like a grown up? And he went there and got his feelings hurt and he didn't even get to eat lunch. You got to go. So I hope for the safety and security of the people of Ukraine that he either get replaced or he resigns, and someone else will come in who really wants peace in Ukraine, and they act like an adult and do what they have to do. My name is Willie Lawson. This has been the Motor Report. The Motor Report is published from fightbackmedia.com, 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 and fightbackmediatv.com. Until we see you again, go out there and learn something, love somebody, and for goodness sakes, y'all take care of yourself. We'll see you when we see you. Bye now.